this enterocyte production.
Yeah, Dr. Maserati and I want to do that. So with metformin, if we give metformin and there's an increase of lactate in the plasma, is that due to production outstripping removal, or are we actually increasing the oxidative disposal of glucose? Or is the glucose high because of increased gluconeogenesis? The answer to all these things, but a combination of trace removal.
Again, let's go back to conventional wisdom. What were we taught in medical school and residency? Be careful of metformin because you increase the risk of lactic acidosis. So a person on metformin is at an increased risk for lactic acidosis if they get dehydrated, if they get contrast in a CT scan. When viewing that concern through the lens of what we just discussed, does it make sense?
Well, caution is always advised. First, do no harm, right? So when we're prescribing this medicine, we don't know if it increases lactate production or inhibits disposal.
Right, but let's go back to the very beginning, right? Which is, just because you increase lactate production, does that mean you're causing acidosis?
Well, that was another important consideration. Lactate rises. What's the change in pH?
Yeah, what happens when you take those subjects, the TBI subjects, and you clamp them at 4 millimole? You said, if I recall, there was no change in sodium, but I think you also said there was no change in pH.
There's a slight alkalosis.
Slight alkalosis. How much? 7.38 to what?
7.38 to 7.35.
Well, that would be a slight acidosis.
The opposite way. 7.4.
Okay. And the colleagues that you referenced in Germany, I think, or Switzerland, who were taking people up to 8 millimole, were they seeing an acidosis?
They did not report it.
Okay, so does that mean it's possible that high levels of lactate do not materially alter acid-base physiology?
Well, in your experience, is sodium lactate given in metabolic acidosis? Sometimes it is.
Yeah, but the lactate content is very low in that setting. Like, it wouldn't be as high as what the examples you're citing are much better examples to ask this question because of you're clamping people at a really, really high lactate that you just don't get to. But again, it seems to me that if what you're saying is correct, George, there's a lot we're misinterpreting from, for example, sepsis literature, right? Where you get that patient in the ICU who's got high lactate. Well, they also have a low pH. But those two things could be driven by different processes.
Yeah, exactly. So when you we addressed this earlier, I think if you see a low pH, yeah, you need to do something. If you see a high lactate in the absence of a change in pH, I would be very inclined not to do much.
Very interesting. You've given me and everybody listening a lot to think about here, George. So it seems to me that understanding the full flux, the full mass balance of lactate, both exogenous and endogenous, is a necessary step to fulfill our understanding of metabolism in a more complete manner, correct?
Yeah, thank you. I think so.
All right.
And you mentioned endogenous versus exogenous. So when exogenous means we're going to infuse lactate or put it in the body some way. Well, I learned in organic chemistry that salt of an acid is a base. So it's not unexpected that when you give it, pH will rise slightly and may part of that also is sodium. Yeah, what does it mean to use this exogenous stuff? So lactate is distinguished from pyruvate, and lactate is reduced. It has more hydrogen on it. There's one more hydrogen, pyruvate. So that that keto bond on pyruvate, double bond oxygen, becomes hydrogen. So it's more reduced. Now when you start putting this reduced equivalent into the blood, it's going to go around the whole body, change redox and the tissues, all the tissues, basically. So which is going to, where the lactate's going to go. So lactate is a powerful signal and works in diverse ways that activate various pathways, including by changing cell redox.
What does lactate do in terms of gene expression? We haven't talked about that, but given how potent a signaling molecule it is in both metabolism directly and vis-a-vis redox, what do we know about other forms of signaling and expression of genes?
So there's a new field now. So we used to think genes are regulated in part epigenetically by acetylation or methylation. Now we realize they're also lactylated. So we've done some of those experiments here in our lab. We haven't published it, but the lactate is a predominant metabolite, and it can bind to genes, and it can affect gene expression.
Meaning it can covalently bind?
Mm-hmm. Methylation, lactylation, that's actually a term, and part of it in comments when you read the literature, because you can people are starting to look at lactylation of histones by
So it's not through histone acetylation, it's direct lactate binding.
and it's called lactylation.
Yeah.
Dr. T got us up into the stratosphere here, where science needs to go. Starting with the premise, exercise is healthful. How can it affect the body corpus, promote healthful living? Well, possibly in part by lactylation of histones, promoting mitochondrial biogenesis.
It's very interesting because we've talked about all of these benefits of exercise, right? We talk about how, my friend clearly has more mitochondria than I do, and he has more MCTs, and he's so much better at clearing lactate and all of these things. But of course, what we're missing in that is the how and the why. Why is he doing that? What is it about his training stimulus that does that? And what you're suggesting, at least as a hypothesis, is what if the lactate itself is signaling the gene expression that leads to the more favorable phenotype seen in that?
With Takeshi Hashimoto, we published a paper. If you just take muscles, put them in a muscle cell in a dish, you add lactate, you activate 500 genes.
But here's the thing, there has to be something, if I'm just thinking about this perhaps a bit too quickly, I would have to believe it also must involve something favorable with consumption. It can't just be, in other words, I have a hard time believing, if you took my friend and you took me, right, and you would argue, based on his training and based on my training, I'm on a bike 3 or 4 hours a week, he's on a bike 15 to 20 hours a week. He's clearly making more lactate in any given week than I am, and he's clearly using more lactate in any given week than I am. But if you came up with an experiment that you imagine you could do this, where you could pair fetus lactate, okay? So in other words, for every millimole of lactate he produces endogenously, you exogenously deliver the same lactate to me.
Ooh.
I still don't think we'd end up the same, even though we have the same input of lactate.
Need a break.
Because he's using it during exercise, whereas I'm
Ooh, this episode on lactate is a must watch
So it's hard for me to imagine that lactate
if you're
by itself
into science.
I have to think there's something
Tap that like button.
with the benefits of how lactate is consumed during exercise.
Ooh.
This is of interest in literature. Now, people do a lactate class, people, and looking for.
Trying to get a
protein.
quick circuit workout in.
What are they seeing?
There's sometimes, yeah,
So,
sometimes
you know,
This sounds a lot.
don't have a lot of time to work out on the weekends.
the endogenous versus
Lucky if I do get the workout on the weekends.
signal. So it's the endogenous lactate when it's high seems to stimulate mitochondria.
After a circuit, you gotta rest, or you'll
Why would that be?
crank out.
Okay, so I want to make sure the listener understands that. That's very important.
Let's go back to bench.
Because it's redox sensitive, that's just fancy speak for saying it depends on the amount of protons or pH balance of what's going on. And if you just give somebody lactate without actually creating the slight alteration in pH that is naturally going to be accompanied by exercise, you don't reap the benefits. Whereas if the lactate is produced in concert with exercise, you get the lactate, but you also get the pH perturbation that is the key to unlock its potential.
That's a very good explanation of what I'm seeing. This is again work of others, really serious scientists, and I think it has to do the mixed results they are getting. It depends on whether it's exogenous or endogenously produced lactate.
So of course it would beg a question, which again, if I were czar, George, if I were in charge of NIH funding, I'd be throwing just a paltry little run at this, because I think it's such an interesting question. But going back to the TBI example, I would want to study as follows, right? I would want to take a whole bunch of people with traumatic brain injuries or concussions. You give one, so you've got a placebo group, you've got a group where you just infuse more glucose and insulin, intranasal insulin and glucose, right? Another group where you just infuse lactate, you take them to equal concentration of lactate glucose, so you take them up to 5 millimole of both. Then you have another group where you do that, but they exercise 2 hours a day, steady state, like zone 2, just enough to get their own endogenous lactate up to about 2 millimole, and then, get that clearance. Because you might argue that it's that exercising group that's also being given exogenous lactate might actually have the best outcomes, because they're getting their redox potential as well as the lactate.
Yeah, so we've thought about this. So the TBI patients are probably not in the cards to doing any exercise. But what about functional electrical stimulation of a comatose patient?
Yeah, although I know a lot of people that have had TBIs. I don't think they'd be up for strenuous exercise, but wouldn't they be up for even, just...
Oh, you're talking about a lot of
Yeah.
the setting was,
Sorry, yeah, I mean, like somebody who's had a concussion, but they're still functional, but they're suffering sort of the negative consequences of it, yeah.
I think we would want to encourage a lot of exercise on these people.
Yeah.
I was talking about
Yeah, someone who's comatose with a significant CNS injury, yeah.
well, how do you raise lactate in them? Endogenously, model electrical stimulation.
It all comes back to myelin.
Well, that's the beginning.
Yeah, we're back to frogs with electrodes.
Well, we're beyond frogs with electrodes, and now I think we're understanding that it's just not a muscle thing, it's the whole thing. And there's glycolysis going on simultaneously. And to get back to our story about the muscle fibers, a lactate producer, a lactate consumer, exchanging chemical energy, or in our studies on healthy people with heart. When we're exercising, our muscles hard enough that are going to release lactate, but it's now the favorite fuel for the heart. Studies that Hashimoto did of executive function, he did these with